Today we're going to talk about the different forms of poetry that you can use in your classroom. And one thing that I'm going to do is read a few poems aloud to help you kind of understand the rhythm and the speed at which you should read aloud for children. We tend to read poetry more quickly than we should, so I'll share a type of poetry and then read an example of it just to help you understand how you might use it in your classroom. So the first type that you will see used with children is narrative. You'll see a lot of narrative in things like Mother Goose, which you're reading about this week, and also any of the Shel Silverstein poems, those types of things that you already see a lot in children's books. So it tells a story, which is a very important thing for children to learn how to do. So it's something that you want to be using in your class. But one thing I'll encourage you to do is look for stories that maybe are different from the ones that you heard as children. Children will all be exposed to things like Mother Goose, but it's great to have a variety of stories to help keep children engaged. And the different types, lyric, sonic, or free verse, we're going to talk about each of those in a minute. But the first thing I'm going to do is read you a narrative poem. The Tale of Custard the Dragon by Ogden Nash. Belinda lived in a little white house with a little black kitten and a little gray mouse, and a little yellow dog and a little red wagon, and a realio, trulio, little pet dragon. Now the name of the little black kitten was Ink, and the little gray mouse, she called her Blink. And the little yellow dog was sharp as mustard, but the dragon was a coward, and she called him Custard. Custard the dragon had big sharp teeth, and spikes on top of him and scales underneath, mouth like a fireplace, chimney for a nose, and realio, trulio, daggers on his toes. Belinda was as brave as a barrel full of bears, and Ink and Blink chased lions down the stairs. Mustard was as brave as a tiger in a rage, but Custard cried for a nice, safe cage. Belinda tickled him. She tickled him unmerciful. Ink, Blink, and Mustard, they rudely called him Percival. They all sat laughing in a little red wagon, and the realio, trulio, cowardly dragon. Belinda giggled till she shook the house, and Blink was weak, which is giggling for a mouse. Ink and Mustard rudely asked his age, when Custard cried for a nice, safe cage. Suddenly, they heard a nasty sound, and Mustard growled, and they all looked around. Meouch, cried Ink, and ow, ooh, cried Belinda, for there was a pirate climbing in the window. Pistol in his left hand, pistol in his right, and he held in his teeth a cutlass bright. His beard was black, one leg was wood. It was clear that the pirate meant no good. Belinda paled, and she cried, "Help, help!" But Mustard fled with a terrified yelp. Ink trickled down to the bottom of the household, and the little mouse Blink strategically mouseholed. But up jumped Custard, snorting like an engine, clashed his tail like irons in a dungeon. With the clatter and a clank and a jangling squirm, he went at the pirate like a robin at a worm. The pirate gaped at Belinda's dragon and gulped down grog from his pocket flagon. He fired 2 bullets, but they didn't hit, and Custard gobbled him every bit. Belinda embraced him. Mustard licked him. No one mourned for his pirate victim. Ink and Blink in glee did gyrate. Around the dragon they ate the pirate. Belinda still lives in her little white house, with her little black kitten and her little gray mouse, and her little yellow dog and her little red wagon, and her realio trulio, little pet dragon. Belinda is as brave as a barrel full of bears, and Ink and Blink chase lions down the stairs. Mustard is as brave as a tiger in a rage, but Custard keeps crying for a nice, safe cage. So what's so important about this type of poem is you don't have to analyze it. You don't need students to analyze it, but it can help you support them as they build vocabulary. You can talk through narrative structure, and you can even start to talk about character and theme and that kind of thing with a fun, silly poem. So the next type is lyrical, and lyrical is kind of what it sounds like. It's meant to be musical, which is a really great way to help students remember concepts or new ideas or even spellings. A lot of times we use things that are lyrical for mnemonic devices. So if you ever learned a song in school to remember something like the names of states and their capitals, that kind of thing, then you've used lyrical poetry before as a student. This poem, The Swing by Robert Louis Stevenson, is a great example of a lyrical poem because the lyrical structure of it mimics the movement of a swing. So it's a great example of how rhythm can be used to help students see the world in a different way or understand pattern and rhythm in a way that they maybe hadn't before. So the swing. How do you like to go up in a swing, up in the air so blue? Oh, I think it the pleasantest thing ever a child can do. Up in the air and over the wall till I can see so wide, river and trees and kettle and all over the countryside, till I look down on the garden green, down on the roof so brown, up in the air I go flying again, up in the air and down. Limericks, I'm assuming you're familiar with. A limerick is, again, very rhythmic, like a lyrical poem, but it has a very specific structure. So lyrics can be any length. They just have to have that rhythm. A lyrical poem does, but a limerick has rhyme on the first two lines, and then the third and fourth line, and then the last line rhymes with the first two. So I'm going to read some limericks so you can hear that rhythm. Susan Pearson has a book called Grimericks that's all kind of gross, which children tend to love. They love the silliness of gross sounding poems, so these are great to use in class. Millicent Mooney is dead. At least that's what everyone said. She's had nothing to say for a month and a day, and a stork's built a nest on her head. And then here's another one. The goblins are goblin to nightin', a gnashin', a gnawin', a bitin', a spittin', a slurpin', a belchin', a burpin', their manners are very frightening. And what's great about the second poem is it's using a lot of figurative language and kind of inventive language, which is great for students when they're first learning how to spell and how to form words. And so these types of poems are great to add to what you're already doing in terms of spelling and phonemic awareness and phonics and that kind of thing. Free verse is the type of poetry that tends not to rhyme, but it still has rhythm and cadence to it. It depends a lot on things like alliteration, which is when the beginning sounds of words are the same, like in a tongue twister, or repetition and pattern, that kind of thing. So it very much sounds like poetry, but it isn't generally rhyming. Porches by Valerie is a good example of a free verse poem that depends on repetition. So let me read that aloud, and I want you to listen as I'm reading to how it still sounds poetic even though it doesn't rhyme. On the front porch, chairs sit still. The table will receive summer drinks. They wait, arranged, strange and polite. On the back porch, garden tools spill. An empty basket leans to one side. The watering can rusts among friends. So you can notice the repeated S sound. Also, the short nature of the lines makes it poetic sounding. And then it starts with on the front porch, and then on the middle it has on the back porch, so it's using that repetition. And the second line, chairs sit still, is similar to garden tools spill. So even though it's not rhyming, it's still got a rhythmic quality to it. And a lot of times little young children will think poetry has to rhyme, and it can be fun for them to try to explore other rhythmic patterns rather than just rhyme. Haiku is one that, I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of time in elementary school writing. It gives students the opportunity, again, like with the free verse poems, to explore different ways of being poetic without necessarily rhyming. So it comes from Japan. It only has 17 syllables, which is also great to work with young students on because syllables are so important in learning, in developing phonemic awareness. So making students confine their writing to a specific amount of syllables can be very helpful in developing that skill. And so having specific numbers of syllables per line is really helpful for students. Most haikus are divided into two parts. So the first part is supposed to be descriptive, and then the second part should be more about a mood or a feeling, which again is great for students because they learn to use their senses as well as to describe feelings, which is great for social emotional learning. So these two haikus come from a collection by Michael Rosen called Cuckoo's Haiku. And I want you to, as I'm reading it, think about the number of syllables you're hearing, so it should be 575. And also notice that the first two lines are descriptive about the natural world, which most haikus are. And then the last line is more to evoke a feeling. It may still be descriptive, but it's meant to evoke some kind of feeling. So the first one, on a staff of wires, blue notes inked from April skies, truly spring's first song. And the second one, the pond's still airstrip, far off trumpets grow louder, one splash, two hushed glides. I like, especially in the second one, how much you can do with only 5 syllables. That's a long line to only have 5 syllables in it. And it's a great example to use with students because they often think if they see multiple consonants at the beginning and the end of a word that it's got to have more than 1 syllable. But notice splash, it's just 1 syllable. And that's really hard for them to grapple with at the beginning when they're first learning phonemes. So that's why I love that example. And also, this author does a lot with punctuation and form. So using the italicized truly gives it emphasis. Using the ellipses at the last line of the second poem very much helps to add to the poem. So haikus can be so good for working with young children because they can learn to do these things themselves, and you can really point out how punctuation is used. Invented forms are probably my favorite for working with children because they can be creative in 2 ways. They can be creative with their words, but also with the picture that their words form. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you one example of an invented form, but they can come in so many different forms. So you might have word puzzles. You might be able to read the poem front to back. You may have seen that going around social media the last couple of years, where the poem has one meaning when you read it in one direction and then a different meaning when you read it in the other direction. And it's really helpful for giving students some creative license with their writing. So the next slide is just one example, but there are tons out there, and I really encourage you to do some investigating. The 2 poems on this slide come from a book of collected poems called Lemonade and Other Poems Squeezed from a Single Word. And what the book does is it takes one word and then the whole poem comes from the letters written from that word. And this is the namesake for the book, and it just shows how physically it looks like the things are squeezed out of a lemon, but also the words themselves are made from that word. So it's got a picture to it, but also meaning. So I'm going to read the one on the right because the one on the left is more for exploring letter sounds, which can be kind of hard to read in a poem form, but the one on the right actually can be a poem. Lemonade. Made one add. Added one lemon load. And one mom. So you could talk with students about what they think that means, or how, it evokes this feeling of summertime and being with your parents outside and having your own lemonade stand. But you could also talk about the sounds if you're teaching students who are still learning phonics. So lemonade, made, you can talk through the sound of the M, the D, and how that E is on the end doesn't make a sound and why that is. So you can use this one very small poem to do a lot of work in terms of language development. So this is the last poetic form we're going to look at. There are tons more out there. My favorite is the villanelle, which we didn't talk about because it's a little sophisticated for early elementary. But I want you to think about poetry as something valuable and not scary. I know a lot of teachers shy away from poetry because it can seem really scary, but it's so valuable for teaching the different skills that we as elementary teachers need to focus on. Even middle school teachers. I used poetry to go over a lot of concepts when I taught middle school. So I highly recommend that you do more investigation and think about how you can incorporate these ideas into your classroom.